Now I'd like to introduce John Ruminer, who is going to talk about our speakers tonight. John is on the board of the Los Alamos Historical Society. He is the vice president, and he's also probably one of the most important roles. He's the chair of our Historic Properties Committee. He takes care of the Oppenheimer House and the Romero Cabin. So, John?
Thank you. Well, we have two speakers tonight who are going to be talking about their latest book, Toni Gibson and Sharon Snyder. Toni and her husband John came here all the way from Michigan today, or this weekend, for this lecture. Toni has been an elementary school teacher in Hawaii and in Michigan for 34 years. And just last year, she was named the Teacher of the Year for the Detroit Public Schools. Congratulations. She was a fifth-grade elementary teacher at Chrysler Elementary School. Some of you may be wondering why a teacher from Detroit is so interested in history of Los Alamos. Well, many of you know that Toni is the daughter of Mike McNovich, the photographer from the Manhattan period. Mike was a GI with the Special Engineering District, SEDs. And to the U.S. Army, to their credit, said, somebody needs to be recording what's going on behind the gates here. And in addition to the technical aspects and all the challenges there, they said somebody needs to record the living history of Los Alamos itself. And Mike, a young GI, had some experience in photography, and they put him in the photography group. And they said, in addition to the technical aspects of the job, get out there, get to the cafeteria, get to the dormitories, ice rink, Fuller Lodge, take pictures of what life is like in Los Alamos. And Toni, the second oldest of 13 children of Mike and his wife. Anyway, Toni has archived her father's collection of on the order of 1,000 photographs and other memorabilia. And she has also recorded many of his memories and recollections of that period. And much of this will be going in to the books that they're publishing now, and we'll be talking about this evening. Now, her friend, Sharon Snyder, and colleague, Sharon's a hilltopper. She moved here during the junior high years. She's class of 65. And like many hilltoppers, went down to University of New Mexico, got her degree there. Later went to New Mexico Tech and got a master's degree. And Sharon taught for 26 years, I believe, in the Albuquerque public school system. She taught geology, and journalism, and chemistry. And for the last 10 years of her career there at the public school, Sharon was the chairman of the science department at Sandia High School. She retired from school there in 96 and has since been a writer-editor and a freelance writer for a variety of different activities. And she is also the director of publications now for the Los Alamos Historical Society. And Sharon has a very exciting year ahead of her with some of the publications that we're anticipating, and perhaps Sharon will talk about that a little bit during her talks. So please help me welcome our two speakers, Toni Gibson and Sharon Snyder.
Thank you very much. Wow. You don't know what it feels like to be here, knowing that I was here with my dad probably in the late 90s, and we walked up on that balcony there, and he showed me, this is where I stood to take the picture of those diners in here during the Manhattan Project. And I'm sorry he's not here to hear me. I'm sure he is hearing me, but it's quite remarkable to be here and to know that I know a little bit about this history now too. So thank you for that introduction and that warm welcome. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Arcadia Books and a little bit about how we came to make this book titled Los Alamos and the Pajarito Plateau. Arcadia Books, as you know, look like this, and they are a structured format, 128 pages, between 4 and 10 chapters, approximately 200 photos, not any more than about 220, no more than 18,000 words. So there's quite a structure within which we have to work. Once you get that structure, then you begin to think about your idea. But let me tell you a little bit about Arcadia first. They are about 6,000 books into their publication history right now. They started in 1993. They do their publications by state or by topic. They also have baseball in America, campus life in America, railroads in America. And then they have the Images of America series, which is the one that we are a part of. Still, there's the same format for all. They are published by state, as I said. When I published the first book that was primarily my dad's photos, that was in 2005. That was the 4th book that came from New Mexico. This now is one of 32 books that are from New Mexico. So they are getting into the state of New Mexico. They actually have quite a few publications that are from states back east. So if anyone has an interest or a love of history and access to photos, there are still many small towns in New Mexico that need books. But anyway, that's kind of how Arcadia does it. Now, once you get your idea and you submit a book proposal, then you're subject to actually thinking about how you're going to do this. So before we got to that point, I had a first book, and I wanted somebody, since I'm living in Michigan, and I was really reacquainting myself with Los Alamos history with my dad's photos. I wanted somebody from here to look at my text and maybe edit and make sure I had nothing that was incorrect. So I called Hetty Dunn, and she referred me on to Sharon, and that's how I met Sharon. And so Sharon was extremely gracious and generous, and she took my text and read it and made some necessary corrections so that I could send it to the publisher. And I did come out for a book signing in 2005, and that's when we kind of hooked up and became more acquainted. And when I would come back into New Mexico, we would visit and chat, and we kind of tossed around the idea of, well, there's more to Los Alamos than the Manhattan Project. So what about doing another book that's more comprehensive? And sounded like a great idea and very doable. So in 2009, I came out here, and because we are actually authoring this book with the Historical Society, we were able to have access to their photos. So we spent 2 or 3 days looking through their photos, thinking of 2 things. What is a photo that would fit into our topic, which is a comprehensive look? We wanted to do prehistory and the caldera and homesteading and ranching and the ranch school and the Manhattan Project and the post-war and the Cold War, and so we're just literally going through one photo at a time, picking out photos. And then we also would come across photos that were just absolutely image worthy and that we thought, this photo has to be in the book. Well, by the time we were done with this part, we had almost 400 photos, and we're limited to 200. So I just left and went back to Michigan because I thought, I don't know how we're going to do this. And I was still teaching at the time, and it's a very hard thing to do when you're working full time. So I got that Teacher of the Year award, and then I retired, which I thought was a great thing to do. So I came back in 2010 in the summer, and we kind of went right back in the same process looking for pictures, but at this time we had begun to think of chapters, and we had a prehistory chapter, we had a homesteading chapter, a school, ranch school chapter, Manhattan Project chapter, and then we kind of bumped into a wall, and we had a next chapter, and we first called it Making a Permanent Town, or a Town in Transition, or Opening the Gates, or Opening the Gates in the Town, and we really couldn't get something like that. And then we began to realize that the environment was a big part of this whole history and this community. So we had the environment, destruction, and preservation, and we really weren't happy with that topic. Then we had our last chapter, which we titled Into the 21st Century. Well, we finished thinking of those things, and we did our book proposal, which you have to do. But once you send that into Arcadia, you have at the most 6 months to finish the project. If you want, you can finish it in 3 months. They give you a 3 to 6 month timeline. Well, it was Christmas time was going to be in that time period. We were in Michigan and New Mexico, so we went for the 6 month time period, the most time. And then we really began to hone in on these chapters, and we read through the guidelines, and Arcadia does not want current photos. This is a vintage photo history that they really like. And so then we were thinking, well, how are we going to do that? Because we don't want an Into the 21st Century chapter if this is an Arcadia book. So we really bantered around how we were going to accomplish that. And then we came up with our Reconnecting chapter, because this is a place that people come back to. And this is a place that people just who are famous come to, because there's been a lot of presidential visits and sports people and entertainment people. So we finally did hone down our chapters into what we thought were 8 workable chapters. Then we really had to start picking and choosing photos, and that became harder and harder, but we were able to do that. We did a lot of research. I came back again in November, thanks to the Historical Society, the library. I actually have a copy of the Los Alamos Times from 1946 through 48 that my dad saved, so I read these very fragile newspapers. Sharon had a wealth of knowledge on the homesteading and the ranch school years. So we spent our time, me in Michigan, and she's in New Mexico, trying to write our captions, trying to get the information correct. I did come back in November, continue to do more research, and what I found was that Cold War time, or that post-war time from the 50s to the 70s, about that time, had a big gap in photos. There were not that many photos available at the Historical Society. In the meantime, I had been looking online at the Atom magazine that probably many of you are familiar with, that the lab published from 1964 through 1980. And because it's online and it's filled with pictures, I began to think, these are the pictures I need, because this is the time period that I need. Well, where do I get those pictures? So Sharon called Alan Carr, who's an archivist over at the lab, and he referred us to Dan Comstock, who is he has titled, or he's called himself, an information stylist, and I am so happy that he is that person. What he had been working on for 3 years was an index to the Atom magazine, the Atom magazine's photos, I should say. So they are all numbered. They're, of course, by month and by year. That index gave me access to a particular photo if I had that need. So we called Dan, and he was more than willing. We sent him a list of probably 40 photos we thought we needed, and he showed up at the lab, you know, with this nice box of photos and negatives, and he let us sit with him for several hours going through and looking at each negative. And if the one that we picked was not the best one, we could look at the other ones in that packet. So when we were able to do that, we filled a lot of gaps in. Again, I went back to Michigan. We continued writing our captions, and Dan was now going to scan them and send them to us. Well, In the meantime, winter comes, and there's a flood in the archives. And Rebecca Collinsworth has been just working like a yeoman to get the pictures that we need from her, and she's working and working, working. Of course, now the Historical Society has to move its archives, and by this time it's January. Our deadline is March 1st, so we get on our knees and start praying, and we start thinking, what are we going to do? Do we need to contact Arcadia and possibly have the deadline extended? But you know what, archivists, you can't beat them. They're wonderful people, and they're dedicated, and they know their information. And Rebecca got she overnighted CDs, she scanned CDs or pictures and put them on CDs, or she scanned pictures and then she overnighted them to me. Dan got all of the ones that we needed, and when he was sending them, he could send them electronically, and if it wasn't right, I could email him and he would do another one. So these people did a magnificent job of getting the photos to us, and not in the nick of time. I mean, it was really before the time. In the meantime, Sharon flew to Detroit, and I locked the door. She couldn't leave the house. It was really pretty. Finally, one afternoon, I said, Sharon, we got to get out of this house. Let's go to the coffee shop and just look, because it was February in Michigan, and you don't do that much outdoors. So we worked for 6 days there and got everything completed and on a little teeny tiny flash drive with a paper layout, because Arcadia sends an actual paper layout that we have to place the number of the photo in and sent it all to them. And we did have to do a couple of changes with the proofs, but not that many. We were able to get all of those done, and thanks to Arcadia and Los Alamos Historical Society and the lab and the library, we are the proud mothers of Los Alamos and the Pajarito Plateau. So that's wonderful. We were actually able to get some photos to show you. So Sharon is going to start talking about some of our photos now.
Well, you've been looking at one here for quite some time, so we'll start with it. You probably recognize that petroglyph as the Iwanyu. That's the one that is in Pajarito Canyon near the new gate. Unfortunately, it's on the west side of the new gate, and so you can't get to it anymore to see it. It is visible from the road when you can drive it, and some of you have clearance to do that. So if you haven't seen this, stop the car and look for it. You'll find it. It's very obvious. This is Charlie Sheen, who was an archaeologist at the lab. And this one was taken, I think, around 1970, and this is one of the early pictures in the book. Now, let me see if I can get this right here. All right. This was taken in 1914. This is Ashley Pond, and one of his daughters, but it's hard to tell from here. I assume the other one is taking the picture, probably. This is the early Buchman Bridge. As Peggy Pond Church noted, this thing washed out most every spring when the water came. If it were there this year, it wouldn't be a problem, obviously. But this is a very nice picture of that, you might say, so-called construction of a bridge. One thing we want to point out is if you have questions as we're going through these, raise your hand, because it'll be easier if you ask the question with a picture up here. So feel free to do that. Okay, this picture is Ted Mather on the left with a huge mustache, and he was the head wrangler at the ranch school. Very popular with the boys. He used to tell them stories about the Old West and the scar he had on his leg from an arrow from an Indian, which we assume was not a tall tale. This is his wife, Rosa Mather, and the person in the saddle there is unidentified. No idea who that is. But the Mathers had a nice little cabin in Water Canyon. Then when he got the job with the ranch school, they were given a cabin in this area to live in. And tales have it that Mother Mather wasn't very happy about that. She loved her little cabin out in the canyon. This is from one of the lumbering operations high in the Alamos, taken somewhere around the turn of the century. This is an interesting picture. This is what it would have looked like in the homestead days before Fuller Lodge was built, before the ranch school came along. Most of this territory and buildings were part of H.H. Brooks' homestead, which became the Los Alamos Ranch School. He sold out to Ashley Pond Jr. And you can see fields and a little stock tank and some nice barn back in there. The house in the middle is the house that he built for his mother, who also had a section of land in her name. So. This is Ten Elders Ranch in Frijoles Canyon. You can see the Frijoles ruin over there on the left, the circular formation. And this is what it was like when A.J. and Ida Abbott leased this land from the Forest Service in 1907 and built this particular ranch. Unfortunately, they borrowed some of the stones from the ruins. You know, it wasn't realized that that was a bad thing to do then. And but they were salvaged and put back into parks, so they weren't lost completely, but we don't know that they were put back in the right parts. So. This is part of the Pajarito Club that was in Pajarito Canyon, became TA-18. The only building that's still there is the pond cabin, the one on the far right. It's on the state register, and it will be part of the Manhattan Project Historical Park, National Historic Park, if that comes through. And I shouldn't say if, I should say when, because I'm sure it will. Ashley Pond Jr. established this Pajarito Club with 4 of his Detroit friends who bankrolled the project, and his family lived there for just over 2 years. The main building there, the larger 2-story one, was the house. This is known as Ashley's limo. This is the one that was sitting on the Buchman Bridge just a little while ago. It's been called a dude ranch. It was more of an elite hunting and fishing club by design, but it had a number of various visitors through its 2.5-year stint. And we don't know who these people were, but it's obviously a family of visitors. This is the pond cabin with, if I can get these right from left to right, that's Hazel Pond, her daughter Dottie, Captain Pearsall, who was a business manager for the club, his mother, who we only know as Mother Pearsall. We don't even know his first name. It didn't survive the records. And the tutor or governess that they had for the children, and Ashley Pond Jr. is the one sitting on the ground there. And he built that cabin himself. It was the office for the club. This is inside Camp May, which you've mostly all heard of, I'm sure. This was a cabin that was built for the ranch school boys. It was near the present Camp May grounds in the ski area. And this is one of the only pictures of the inside of the cabin. It was built by the parents of this young man. This was George May, and he was a ranch school student in the early days. His parents were in some sort of business in Chicago, well-to-do, and they shared some of that with the ranch school by making this facility for the boys to camp in. This is the inside of the big house. This building stood through the war years. It would have been sort of over in that direction where the parking lot is today. This area was the library. You can see that it's decorated in a very rustic form, furniture, Navajo rugs. And just to the left is a big fireplace that was in the center of the building, and you could walk all the way around it. And while I'm thinking about this, we're very pleased tonight to actually have a ranch school boy with us. Alan Church is here tonight to pick up his copy of this book, and really glad he's here. Could you stand up for a minute, Alan? And his cousin Joan Pond is here as well, so we're very fortunate that they come and visit.
Sharon, who took this picture, do you know?
Who took this picture? I'm guessing it might be a Parkhurst. We were very lucky in the ranch school days to have two professional, really top-notch photographers doing all of the photographs. Laura Gilpin was official photographer for the school for several years, and T. Harmon Parkhurst, who probably took this picture, was the other one. And they left us some wonderful records. Here the ranch school boys are doing what's called community work. They worked on projects to improve the area, improve trails, build things like this toboggan slide for winter activities. And there are pictures in existence of this being used in the winter. Here's a beginning of a trail ride. They're leaving, riding around Ashley Pond to head out into the hills. You can see that Ashley Pond actually had quite a bit of reeds growing out there, weeds and grass around it, tall trees that are no longer there. This is a more recent picture. This is one of the ones we put in the book that is contemporary. This is the gun site before much of the restoration was started on it, and I haven't been out there since several weeks ago, maybe months ago, so I don't know how much has been done since then. But it will look much better than that eventually, and this will be one of the park buildings as well. This is the B site, and that is restored at that point, although I think not finished when this was taken. This is a party that was held in the Oppenheimer house. Toni, you want to share who those people are? This is your shot.
First of all, that is in the Oppenheimer house, and it's during the physics conference that was held in 1946 when the war was over, and what was going to happen to this project was a question. And physicists from around the country were invited to come out here, meet in a kind of colloquial way, and discuss what would be the next step. So that's one of the times when Oppenheimer returned, and when Eric Jetty lived in that house at that point, and his wife's back is to us, and Betty Brixner is on the left, and I can't remember the other two people. Walters, okay. Jetty is the man with the lighter suit on. Mm-hmm.
This is part of Bathtub Row, circa 1940, what did we decide, 43 or so? Right in the middle of the Manhattan Project time.
Spruce Cottage there.
Mm-hmm. We know pretty well a date because Skip Dunn was able to identify the year of that car for us. Skip gets all our old car questions. Thank goodness for Skip. Picture of the Oppenheimer house. Circa what? We're not sure about the date on this one. Okay. Okay. Ottawee Bridge, as it looked in ranch school days and in the beginning of the Manhattan Project. And I guess I'll have to take Peggy's role here. It is Ottawee Bridge and not Ottawee. So I'm not going to go through pronunciation drills like she did, but anyway, just thought I'd mention that. This is the old Safeway store. How many of you are here that shopped in that store? Still a few around. Yeah. Yeah, I remember it pretty well. This is what it looked like when my family moved here in 1959.
Where was it?
It was Daylight Donuts and that area right in there, UPEX. It was that side of that parking lot. Yeah. This is the United Church as it first looked after the church was moved in. It wasn't built on site, it was moved in. And I have never heard where it came from in the state. It was Santa Fe? Okay. But this was in the very early days. You can see the chapel apartments are already built back there to the side. And you know now that this is, you know, developed into a much larger complex, still there. This is the practice evacuation from the late 50s. There was another one that I remember in the 60s, and I don't know if there have been more than two. And, but, yeah, but you can see that this is on Diamond Drive, and there are a lot of people trying to get through there. Probably looks sort of too familiar to some of you at this point, despite the vintage of the cars. The early days of what we called the center. Radio towers there. And this looks to be a professional photographer, but I don't know who it was. I don't think it's, It's one of your dad's photos? Okay. And this is a nice one of the pond, the mountains in the background. The LA was still on the mountain. And there were actually trees. This is an interesting picture. This was one we both really liked a lot and felt it had to go in the book. This is the little boy mock-up that's been lowered into the museum. This is a contemporary. This is the cleanup from DP site. And we wanted to put one of these in to emphasize this environmental cleanup period, which we thought was very important. This we all recognize, unfortunately. It's the main Cerro Grande plume. This was one of the nice photographs that we got from the lab. This is a great picture. The Nobel laureates coming back. This is in our Reconnecting last chapter. And I hope I get this right. It's Macmillan, Segre, Robbie, Beta, and Alvarez, all Nobel winners. This is a wonderful picture from 1963, Kennedy's visit. How many of you were here that day? Yeah, great memories, isn't it? Yeah, one of the best. And this is a picture that is in the book. It's been published many times, but how could you not put it in? Norris Bradbury and Dorothy McKibben proudly looking at that plaque that went on 109 East Palace near her office. I think it's very sad that this plaque is way in the back and there's nothing on the portal that kind of points you back there to go see it. You have to know it's there. And I think everybody that goes by that needs to see it. And I wish that we could come up with something that publicized it for tourists going by there so that they would walk back there and look at it, because it's very impressive. And this is our finale picture in the book. This is Oppenheimer's last visit in the 60s when he spoke at the auditorium. And it's, I think, one of the best pictures of him. It's one of my favorites. And I think your parents' pictures are next, so do you want to talk about that? You think there are more of these? You want to try it? Nope?
You just got a glimpse of a picture and I want you to see it, but I would like to tell you how Arcadia not only publishes history, it begins a process for people to look at their own history, and that's exactly what happened to me. In 1999, I was in White Sands, and I was with my daughters, my husband, and two of our nephews, and I picked up this book in the gift store. And I looked through it, and I saw a very familiar picture, and I couldn't place it. And then all of a sudden I realized it was on the wall in our living room. And I probably walked by it 1,000 times, and I had become totally immune to it. So I bought the book and I took it home and I said, "Look, Dad, this is in the book." And he said, "Yeah." And there were about 12 more of his pictures in the book. And I began to think, well, yes, my parents were here in Los Alamos. They met here in Los Alamos. My mom is from Las Vegas, and my dad was part of the Army Specialized Training Program, and he was sent out here and became the photographer because he had done some photography in college, even though he was trained as an engineer. And he began to take all these photos, and my family was big. I was number 2, and I was the oldest girl, and I have 7 brothers and 5 sisters. And it is wonderful, but it wasn't easy to grow up that way. It was crowded, you know. We were probably on top of each other and all over each other and arguing with each other, and you know, it was stressful, but it was still wonderful. But it was life, and it was also the 60s, and I could care less what my parents were doing, to tell you the truth, because we were all like that. You know, we were so smart when we were 19 and 20, so I didn't know anything, actually. But I wanted to get away from my family, so I moved to Hawaii, and that's where I met my husband. And then I started raising my children. I got married, and you know, it was interesting. My dad was very strict and very powerful. You know, he kind of ran the household like the Army did, and it was really good because we all turned out pretty good. But it wasn't an easy place to grow up in. But I met this wonderful man and married him in Hawaii, and I just announced, I'm getting married, and I didn't tell them, you know, could I get married, or would you like to meet this man? I just said, I'm going to get married. And I'm not sure if that's why, but there became a distance between me and my dad at that time. And at the same time, my dad was not very nice to my husband. He was just very distant. And it really hurt my feelings, because I had to be married to this man, and I intended to stay married to this man. Well, life went on, and we had our children, and you know, I kind of outgrew some of that, and I knew I needed to have a relationship with my parents. So when I found this book and these pictures, I thought, well, there's probably more. And I said, well, are there more? So my dad goes to the bathroom where there are these big cupboards and pulls out 2 boxes of pictures. And literally, they're all just in there, although he did keep very good records, and we started looking at them. And it was just a wealth of information, and I was interested. And a brother of mine did the first book with me, and so we did sit down for almost 3 years and go through every picture and record what he had to say and write down and put them in photo-safe sleeves and do this preservation of family history. And I knew, and he said at the time it would be going to the Historical Society. Well, that was from about the year 2000 to the year 2003. And in 2000, he was diagnosed with colon cancer, and he had some surgery and had 3 very good years of life after that. And that gave us the chance to really look at these photos and then get the book started. And I did get the book started in 2004, and it was in the fall, and his cancer had returned by then. And it looked like maybe he would live to see the book, but it became increasingly clear that maybe he wouldn't. So I was getting a little nervous about this, and I got the whole project done and sent into Arcadia by late November of 2004. Excuse me. And then I got a nice letter from Arcadia saying, "Congratulations, your book will be out March 15th. And I was really not sure that my dad would last. So I decided in January to call Arcadia. At this point in time, their books were being printed in England. Right now, they are printed in South Carolina, so they're stateside, but they were being printed in England. I didn't know if there was a copy, but I called them and said, is there any publicity copy or proof copy of any kind that I could see? And they said, yes, there is. And I said, I need that. I think my dad's dying. So they said, we'll send it overnight urgent. So I got on a plane on January 12th and got there that evening. The next morning, UPS rang the door at 7 o'clock in the morning. Overnight urgent, there was the book. And my dad woke up and he got the book right away and he held it in his hands and he said, "Now you can lay me down to rest." So he took the book and he, go ahead and show that picture of me and him, because we were thrilled. I don't think it was a proof copy, it was a real copy. And at this point, his cancer was in his liver, so he was yellow all over, very thin and not totally bedridden, but very ill. So we took pictures and he signed that copy and we had a wonderful time. You can show the picture of my mom with him. She was there too, and we took pictures of her and my dad with the book. And you know, these pictures in the first book have been publicized or in almost any book about Los Alamos, and he was a GI, so his name wasn't connected to them. So it was fitting that he got some recognition. And so we thought, hey, this is great. He saw the book, and he really revived. He kind of came alive. He seemed energetic. He was also very open to talk to anybody. And so those of us of my family who wanted to repair anything in a relationship, and no matter if your parents are perfect or not, you want to have good relationships, you know, and not have them go to the grave and you hated their guts, you know, it's just not worth it. So brothers and sisters came and we visited and we laughed and we talked and we just cared for each other. And I just felt like, you know, maybe he wasn't such a bad guy, and he probably did like my husband, you know, it's okay. So I went back to Michigan on Tuesday, January 12th, I think, no, the 16th. Seeming like my dad was fine, maybe he would last a little bit longer. And on Friday, my sister called and said he had passed away. And it was a shock, because I thought, no, he didn't. I just saw him, he couldn't have passed away. Well, what shocked me even more was a letter that my husband received in the mail that same day. And it was to John, it was not to me. And his handwriting was microscopic and kind of hard to read. And I could tell he wrote this on that night that I left. It said, "Dear John, I want to add my thanks and appreciation for your support, patience, and assistance with Toni and John's tremendous dedication to the Los Alamos Book Project. You have been very kind and supportive. Based on my observations and information, feedback is appreciated by all of our family. Please continue loving Toni as much as you can, because she loves you completely. The timing of her visit this time was ideal. You were probably informed that, arrangements were made to UPS urgent overnight this one available copy directly to me. It arrived 2 minutes before 7 a.m. on January 13th. I was thrilled. Toni and I received this copy and reviewed each page after page. The publisher did an outstanding quality job. It is a winner. Thanks again. Sincerely, Mike." So I am thankful to Arcadia, not just for the book, but for my relationship that was really repaired and restored with my dad. And his best man is here, Roger Rasmussen, my new boyfriend, don't tell my husband, was my dad's best man and his best friend. And it's just such an honor to come here and be with you all. Thank you very much.
Well, I can't possibly top that story, but I want to thank all of you for being here with us tonight too. And just a tiny bit about me. My family moved here, I will admit it, from Texas, and we didn't look back. But that happened in 1959, and it was the best thing that happened in my life. This place has been tremendously good to me. I am who I am because of growing up in Los Alamos. And so this is for all of you. Thank you very much.
I'm sure Sharon and Toni would be willing to take stories or questions or comments.
Didn't mean to make you cry, sorry.
How many copies of the book are typically published? In particular, how many, for this
It's in the hundreds. I think it depends, but it's not even up to 1,000 for the first printing. And then if it sells out, they will do a second printing. So it's in the hundreds. I'm not actually sure if it's 600 or 400 or 800. Yes, sir.
What was your brother David and Andy like growing up? I know him.
Okay, here, this is Andy. Andy would do this. He'd stand like this, and he would flex his stomach, and he would let me hit him as often and as much as I wanted to prove what a man he was. And David got along with everybody,
Right.
and still does.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Does Arcadia print in color at all, or is that?
No, it's black and white. Although we have, some of our photos were originally color, they were changed, through Arcadia or by us to black and white. And that reminds me, the cover photo is our first deadline. It's usually about 3 months before the whole book deadline is completed. We have to submit 5 photos. We don't choose the cover photo, but we give them a number of photos from which they can choose, and then they format it and see if it will fit on the front, the side, and the back, giving them enough space to put their column of information. So they ended up choosing that particular one of several that we sent.
Toni, can you talk a little bit about that process? Because I know you both commented on how some of the photos were really not good quality, but the book came out good.
And they can do an excellent job. There was a photo I had of, and it's in the book, of the first ski tow that the Army put up that was a little 2x2, I think, black and white photo that my dad had. And I scanned it and sent it to them, and it just did not work for them. I actually ended up sending them that copy. We have that Oppenheimer photo with Oppenheimer and Bradbury, that's the very last one, that had a scratch in it. And they do not want us to doctor any photos. And Sharon kept saying, I can fix it, I can fix it. I said, Sharon, don't fix it. And she didn't, and she sent it to them, and they cleaned it up a little bit. So,
It's amazing.
right.
It was a definite scratch right through off his face. Didn't want it there, but they took care of it.
But on the other hand, they do like the vintage photo, and not necessarily the ruined photo, but they want the photos that look like they've been from the past. So, and then they will work with them. Yes?
Do you have plans for the other 200 photos?
Do you have plans for the other 200 photos, Sharon?
No, not right this minute.
She's really busy. And no, I don't, but, it's topically what we did by saying Los Alamos and the Pajarito Plateau, we almost picked too large of a topic. I've seen a new one out called Albuquerque Parks and Open Spaces. So that's a pretty narrow topic. You would go around Albuquerque and get the parks and open spaces. By including something that you have 100 years, we have to limit ourselves quite a bit. So you will come across things and you might say, why did they pick that photo? And we were trying to have this narrative arc, or say, why didn't they include something about? It was very tough to choose those.
Do you want to compare the 2 books?
I'm sorry, what?
Would you like to compare the new book with your first book?
Sure. Sharon had something to say.
Yeah, just one quick announcement. If any of you have looked at the lecture schedule, you know you get me again in 2 months. I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that the long-awaited biography of Peggy Pond Church is coming out November 8th. And would love to see you all back here to celebrate that. It's been a quarter of my life on this project, and it's going to be pretty exciting. Thank you.
Comparing these 2 books, they are very different. First of all, one deals with a 3-year time span. That's Los Alamos 1944 through 1947. The other one is at least 100 years. For this one, this was back in 2005, I chose the cover photo. Arcadia at that point did not choose the cover photo. They are primarily photos that belong to me. They're part of my dad's photos. There are some that I wasn't sure who they were by, and those most likely came from the Historical Society and could have been his photos. There are pictures that he was in, so I know he didn't take them, but he was always busy. He was so busy, he was having his friends accompany him on all kinds of adventures, taking pictures. For example, Roger told me this afternoon, when my dad wanted to go and do some pictures of, let's say, the Chumayo Church, he would get on somebody's borrowed motorcycle, no hats, no jackets, just my dad in the front, and Roger's on the back, as he says, holding on with his toenails, with a nice, long, heavy wooden tripod with a speed graphic camera at the end. And so they got lots of photos that way. So if he was in the picture, he obviously didn't take the picture. The other thing was we had a word limit of 18,000 words for the second book. I was not told to be quite so succinct in my words, so I included as much as I can. We like to include captions that are informative and readable and correct historically, but tell you the story. If you pick up Arcadia books, you will sometimes see just one sentence on a picture, which is probably not enough information. When you have this many photos, you want to include as much as you can. So that's primarily the differences. Yes?
It's interesting that in the digital age, what is a vintage photo is going to become more problematic.
You're correct. You know what? And that reminds me, on the first book, I sent the photos. Nothing was digitized except for the text. At that point in time, they wanted the photos. They wanted to digitize them themselves. So I gave this collection of 200 to UPS, and I said, bye, I hope I see you when you can return. And I did. And that's a very good point, you know, who and when and how that all works out. We'll see. Yes?
Your dad had the photos. Did he also have the negatives, or did the laboratory hold the negatives?
That's a very good question. I have a lot of negatives. And if you look in the first book, there's a picture of my dad sitting at his desk, and on one side is a atomic explosion, and then there's a couple of pictures of portraits. Maybe Oppenheimer is there. If you look at his desk, there's just so many photos. He was the photographer, but he was also a community member. So some of these photos were just stuff he took of his picnics and his future wife and hiking, things like that, which we had. But the other thing was they made copy negatives and copy prints of these over and over and over. So in 1970, when there was the first SED reunion here at Fuller Lodge, and he was asked to do a show. He put a slide presentation together, so now I have a whole set of slides as well of a lot of these photos. But one thing he did to make this slide presentation, he loved doing lots of graphics and fun cut and paste kinds of things. He took these photos and spread them on a table, and then made kind of a title of his presentation, and then took a picture of that and put that as his first image in the slideshow, and then took all those photos and just left them on the table when he came up here and told people, help yourself. And a lot of them were taken, and some of them weren't. One thing that was taken, I don't know if he meant to do this or if it was just by accident, but he had a security handbook, and it was somehow picked up in that, but somebody realized it was his and they mailed it back to him. So I still have his original security handbook. So he had photos that, like the Oppenheimer portrait and some of these physics conference, I have a lot of copies of those things. Now, when I put that first book together, I didn't know if the lab would say, you don't own those photos. They're the Army photos, but nobody has come after me yet.